it's a movement that has been making headlines that's bringing together some of the state's top leaders to address some of the state's most pressing issues. We're talking about rediscovering Hawaii's soul.
A very important movement, and we're so happy to have the founder and chairman of HEC, along with a professor from the University of Hawaii, to talk about their engagement on this very important movement. Spotlight Now starts now.
You're watching Spotlight Now with Ryan Kalei-Suji and Yunji Denise on Hawaii News Now. Have questions or comments for our guests? Join the conversation in our Facebook live stream. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, thanks for tuning in here to Spotlight Now on Hawaii News Now. As we mentioned, we're going to be talking about Rediscovering Hawaii's Soul, which is sponsored by the Hawaii Executive Collaborative, as well as our program here on Spotlight Now. And we are very excited to welcome in Duane Kurisu, chairman of the Hawaii Executive Collaborative. Thank you so much for being here, Duane.
Oh, thanks for having me, Ryan.
Well, we are
And
so,
Angie.
and me too, right? I appreciate that.
But you know, before you start, what I have to say, I can see myself on the monitor, and I said, do I actually look like I'm kind of old and chubby?
Oh, don't say that. It's always shocking to see oneself on TV. It's like listening to yourself on an answering machine. We are so excited to talk to you today about this movement. We've had some guests on in the past. Governor John Waihee was here to talk about rediscovering Hawaii's soul. But for folks who have not really tuned into that program or are not really familiar, what is rediscovering Hawaii's soul?
Well, much has been said that our children and grandchildren will get less than what we have. And to that, I say, bull. This is our chance. We have this one chance to give our children and our great-grandchildren more than what we have. And we all have, in Hawaii, we all have all that we need. And so in capturing what we consider to be Hawaii's soul. And so it's about bringing that forth, bringing it out, being authentic to who we are. And, you know, we in Hawaii can travel to the most distant places. We can try the most exotic foods and meet the most unusual people. But no matter where we go, we're always at home because we can be authentic people, and that authenticity to who we are is what makes us special. So when we look at building a life that's better for our future generations, it's about focusing upon our strengths, and that strength is Hawaii's soul. I remember, by the way, is this okay? I'm kind of rambling.
Please.
Okay.
It's
You know, about 20 years ago, I remember being called into a symposium in New York, and I sat in this room, and I was intimidated because this room was full of the captains of finance globally and people who did buyouts for global companies. And so I sat silent until I looked at the clock, and there was 20 minutes left. I said, you know, I didn't travel 5,000 miles just to sit. And so I figured, okay, I'm going to go be authentic and give all that I got into what I have to say. And the topic at that moment was about finding leaders to lead these companies that these different people were buying out. And while they talked about metrics and finances, the Hawaii way was about being authentic and about people and about culture and about the spirit of that company and the people that they serve. And at that moment, when I saw silence and I actually saw one person's mouth drop, I said, now I know that what the world wants, what we have, and that what they want and what they feel is this soul that we have that's really special.
Duane, I'm wondering if you can share with us how this all came together with you being moved in this way to take this initiative. You, a very successful businessman in your own right, didn't necessarily need to do this, but you felt, as you said, that this was important. What were some of the steps that you took in order to make this movement begin to happen? Who did you bring in? What was some of the catalyst points at the beginning to get this together?
Well, I get blamed for a lot of things that I didn't do, and I get credit for a lot of things that I didn't do. So it wasn't me by myself. It was a group of people, and it was a group of business people. And my primary go-to is Kamanao Crab. I introduced him to people as my brother. He's like 6'4", and I'm 5'7". Well, I shrunk. I'm 5'6" now, but so it was a collective effort to address the divisiveness that we've been feeling, and this need for our children to understand the characteristics of what makes Hawaii so special. And so it was a leap of faith by bringing in, at first, like a group of CEOs in town, community leaders, together with kupuna in the Native Hawaiian community to work on Native Hawaiian issues, but ultimately it led to working on issues that affected all races and all ages.
And so for folks who aren't familiar, this work started in 2022. You've been doing this for about 2 years now. Is that right?
So the collaborative started in 2017, and this program, this initiative called Rediscovering Hawaii Soul, started in 2022.
And with that work, there's a series of workshops that happen, basically meetings from time to time on these various topics, bringing together these leaders. What kind of momentum do you see? How often are you meeting? What kind of issues are you working on that you think the public would be interested to know about?
Well, when we started, we brought in Adam Kahane, who South Africa brought into that country when they thought there was going to be civil war after Nelson Mandela got let out of prison. And so we contacted him to help us. And in 2022, we gathered those leaders that we talked about. And the first day and a half, the first 2 days was really like, I was just talking to John Osorio before this. We're all questioning where we're going to go with this, because we had such diverse views, such diverse personalities. And but miraculously, we came up with these documents that expressed a view that we all agreed upon. And it, at the end, Adam Kahane said, I've been doing this since 1992. I've stopped civil war. We've stopped people from killing each other. But never in his work has he ever experienced anything like he experienced here in Hawaii. And where we got such diverse groups gotten together to come up with a solution in such a short period of time. And then he leaned over and whispered, Duane, Hawaii will lead the world.
I think one of the things that sitting in some of the things, and one of the things that I think people would be most impressed by is as you said, the diversity of the group of people. You have Native Hawaiian leaders who have a history of being very outspoken about very strong causes that impact the Native Hawaiian communities, and people from Bishop Street. Yeah. And you would not think that these two would be having a conversation or finding some sort of commonality, because they come from such different viewpoints. From the finance side and political side to the Native Hawaiian side, and yet they were able to find common ground on issues, and sometimes not, but be able to have that dialogue. What kind of example do you think that sets forth for just the general community as we see more and more issues that are beginning to divide this community?
Ryan, it starts with trust, and that's what we learned about this process. that you can have, and we did have diverse views, and there were some what could and we talked about the most difficult issues, but the differences were handled with dignity, and in this environment of trust, some you can we began to see commonalities to the point where those commonalities end up in finding solutions for both sides. It's taking ourselves out of our own personal wants and needs, our concepts based on experiences, and looking at something that's good for everybody.
Yeah, and through those meetings, I know that you're continuing to hold them and continuing to meet with this diverse group of leaders. What kind of shifts have you felt in yourself in doing this work?
Pua, now everybody calls her Auntie Pua. So Auntie Pua Kanahele focused on this concept of reciprocity. And I thought I knew what that was. And, after going through this process and spending a lot of time with this group, I realized that this sense of reciprocity, this sense of love for our Aina, and how everything is in synchronicity, that I would think about this sometimes, but I find that people like Auntie Pua lives it 24/7, and I found that I have a lot to learn from that. The other thing that I learned was this concept of ko Hawaii that Governor Waihe explained to me. So, in this process, I became a little bit more bold, maybe, in addressing the issue. And I remember in this gathering, actually, it was in CNHA conference in Las Vegas. So there were 2,000 people in the audience. I said, well, same thing. I didn't want to travel 3,000 miles here just to sit and be nice. And so I said, okay, I love Hawaii, and I would die for Hawaii. So how come I can't call myself Hawaiian? So I could hear the whole audience go, oh. And Governor Waihe was sitting next to me, and he said, Duane, you want to call yourself Hawaiian? Call yourself Hawaiian. There's not even such a word in the Hawaiian language. But he said, no, if you call yourself Kanaka, now you're pushing it. So he said, you call yourself Ko Hawaii. I am from Hawaii. And I think what I learned through this process is that a lot of people in Hawaii didn't feel comfortable that they were Hawaiian or Ko Hawaii. In fact, we had this gathering for Lahaina about a week and a half ago, and this Filipino leader from Lahaina stood up and said, he was born and raised in Lahaina, but he still feels like he's a guest. And I think this whole Rediscovering Hawaii process is important, not only for Native Hawaiians, but it's for everybody. And people like Nestor in Lahaina needs to feel that this is home because he is Ko Hawaii. So these are some of the things that I've learned, including being a little bit more bold about this subject.
When you talked about some of the things that you're learning, especially what the Rios partners bring to the table with their experience of what's happened in South Africa, what they've been able to establish here within the working group that you guys have with Hawaii Executive Collaborative and this initiative, one of the things that came out from some of the initial meetings were various scenarios of what the future of Hawaii could look like if no action was taken, if action was taken. Could you explain a little bit about those scenarios, if you could take us through that, and why that was so significant in this process?
Well, Ryan, I'm old, so I don't remember what the different scenarios were. But one of the but one scenario was to keep things the way they are. And you know, in the scenario work, it's not about predicting the future. It's not about choosing what your future is going to be. Is looking at what's plausible. What are the different what are the possibilities for our future? But one possibility that we said is a no-go is that things stay the same. So it's gonna be hard work, and it's people making an undying commitment that we need to have a Hawaii that is different, and it's going to take everybody. It's going to take not only guys from Bishop Street or the Kupuna, but we got to stand up. Stand up for not only what's good for us, but what's good for everybody. So, you know, in this process, we talked about, so we're told, okay, we need to acknowledge the illegal overthrow of Hawaii. So in this document for Hawaii Executive Collaborative, so I said, well, you know, I'm going to have to go call the CEOs in town to see if it's okay to say that there's an overthrow. But what I can't say is that there was an illegal overthrow. So, but anyway, in the document that came out, it did refer to that. But at the same time, it talked about the hurt that the Native Hawaiians felt, but it also referred to the hurt that all the other races felt: the Japanese, the Filipino, the Portuguese, the Haole. We all experience hurt. And so our future really is about acknowledging that hurt and moving forward with that hurt. And finding ways for forgiveness. You're not going to forget, but to forgive. And that's the only way Hawaii is going to be able to move forward.
You know, when we talk about the scenarios, Honolulu Magazine devoted an entire issue. So if folks want to go to that website, they can read about the 4 different scenarios, because it is like a pop quiz. You can't be expected to remember.
I know. I'm old.
All of them.
I'm old, man.
But it was
there was a pop quiz.
But it was very interesting to read through all the different directions that Hawaii could go in. And you talked about the shift of yourself, the boldness that you're now experiencing.
Yeah.
I'm interested to know, just in doing this work with this diverse group, what kind of changes and shifts you've seen in others.
I've seen trust, and I've seen the willingness to, actually it's both sides, you know, it's as we reach out to be more collaborative in our efforts to make Hawaii a better place. It's something that there's a domino effect to that. And so that in an environment of creating trust has resulted in some initiatives being done by Native Hawaiians and the business community, and we were also moving forward on a number of different initiatives. And John Osorio is following me, who's we're going to be talking about the Kingdom Lands issue, military issue, the issue with our economy and tourism, but all based upon the identity of our Native Hawaiian culture.
You know, let's talk a little bit about some of those topics, because you know, as this movement, I should say, has evolved. Just starting with the scenarios and then bringing more and more leaders into the picture, getting them up to speed with what you folks have been working on, and then we saw sort of this targeted approach to some of these bigger issues that you address, military. You know, whether it is seated land, education is also in there, tourism, and finding that sustainability. These are all issues that these leaders working in these working groups are now trying to tackle. What would you see as a win? How do you measure the success of this group when you see all of these groups now trying to find some sort of solution and commonality?
Well, there are a number of different initiatives that have started, but a week and a half ago, we did a convening for Lahaina where we had the leaders on the ground in Lahaina together with our governor, our mayor, the mayor of Maui, all the bank presidents, the head of FEMA, with representatives from Brian Schatz's office, with ILWU, with people representing other parts of our community, and it was the purpose of it was first trust building, and for the purpose of everybody starting to there's a willingness to start on working from the same page. So that happened a week and a half ago, but as we continue to work on a number of things that we've committed to do, and the end result of that work, I wouldn't say hopefully, will be rebuilding Hawaii, rebuilding Lahaina, and restoring Lahaina's soul. And as we do that, and as we work on Lahaina, we look at it as being the foundation for rebuilding Hawaii's soul, for all Hawaii.
And when you talk about that, these are steps. When Ryan's talking about sort of a pinnacle, right, an end goal.
Yeah.
It sounds like the process is part of the work and is part of the success, right? That if we
Yes.
are able to bring the kind of diversity that you're talking about together, that it's not necessarily at the end that you see the change, it's sort of in process.
Yeah. And, as we go through this process, I can't help but think about the way I grew up. I grew up in a plantation camp. And it was a time and place where many of people in my vintage we aspired. Our aspirations really was about character traits like trust, generosity, responsibility, friendship, rather than power and money. And really, and if you addressed everybody as Mr. and Mrs. And if you caught two fish, you kept one and gave one to your neighbor. And when I moved to Honolulu, I moved to Honolulu for school. I just couldn't imagine why people would buy tangerines, oranges, papaya, lettuce. I'm thinking, like, why is a supermarket selling this stuff? Because in the plantation community, those things all showed up at your door. And I forget why we're saying this, but anyway, so this sense of community is something that's core to this whole rediscovering Hawaii's soul process. And in our whole Hawaii Executive Collaborative process, it's about everybody working together to build a better and stronger community.
I think one of the other key things that I noticed in this process was when I saw the importance of the native Hawaiian voice, and you kind of touched upon that. But when you hear about, and you hear from some of the leaders that are involved in this process, oftentimes they say, we were never included in the conversation. We were never brought to the table. And so a lot of times that's why we see some of the division with these issues with government. How important is the Native Hawaiian voice to this entire movement and its role in helping to redefine some of these new ideas and mindsets moving forward?
Well, many of us are doing this because we feel that unless those voices are heard and the issues that the Native Hawaiian people carry with them are addressed and resolved, Hawaii cannot become the Hawaii that we see in our heads and feel in our hearts. Its core. So some people would ask, like, why are you crazy? Why are you working on the city lands, kingdom land issues? Well, we're working on it because it's core. It needs to be addressed. And I said in one meeting, so they said, well, how long is this going to last? I said, well, the day I had some holiday guys on this Zoom call. So I said, the day I make, we got to resolve this before the day I make. So I looked around. I said, oh, sorry. What I meant is before I die, we're going to have to resolve this kingdom lands issue. It's and that the kingdom lands issue. I know I'm repeating what I said, but it's core. How we talked about Hawaii's soul and how Hawaii, like Adam Kahane said, Hawaii will lead the world. Well, it starts right here, and it starts with our Native Hawaiian culture and the spirit of the Native Hawaiian people.
Yeah, it sounds like that healing is really critical to us being able to move forward.
Yep.
Tell us, we're almost out of time. If people want to learn more, we know they can
Shucks.
go to hawaiisoul.org. But
Yeah.
share a final thought.
yeah.
We know that the public will be interested to figure out how to participate, and they're curious about this work. What would you tell folks? What's a final thought today?
Well, please visit our website, and we want. This is not an exclusive process. It's an inclusive process that we want as many people to participate as possible. And, maybe John Osorio might cover this, but in our discussion on kingdom lands, he talked about the need for the community to be empowered. The most powerful thing we can do is to get the community involved. And so one of the things that I personally would like to see is the resurrection of our ahupua'a system as being core to the way we live, work, and play. So, and it doesn't mean we're taking away county laws and state laws and federal laws, but those things laid on top of this, and it's as an example. So it's like I live in Manoa, so now I am responsible for the watershed as well as the beaches of Waikiki. So it's about, if you're living in this ahupua'a, you're a tenant in common to this ahupua'a, and that is your community. Same with I was explaining to Doug Wordsworth of Kaneohe Marine Base. I said, you and your enlisted men are looking at Kaneohe Marine Base as your community, but if you're part of this ahupua'a, then the water source is part of your community. And so when you work in restoring Kauai Nui Marsh, it's not because you have to, but it's because you want to, because it's part of your community. So, my hope is that we work diligently and get all Hawaii to work on this diligently to restore our ahupua'a system and what it means to ensure that the identity of the Native Hawaiian people stays for the next 1,000 years, despite our blood quantum. That it stays as part of the way we live, work, and play, and that we all at the same time learn about our personal responsibility of community, because we're part of this ahupua'a. So that's my hope and wish.
Okay, Duane Kurisu,
Yeah.
Chairman of Hawaii Executive Collaborative. Thank you for joining us today to talk about rediscovering Hawaii
Thank you.
Soul. The website is hawaiisoul.org. We'll be right back after this with John Osorio.
Welcome back to Spotlight Now here on Hawaii News. Now we're continuing on in our conversation revolving around rediscovering Hawaii soul and the movement that is taking place. Joining us now is Dr. John Osorio. Thank you so much for joining us.
Aloha.
We, of course, just spoke with Duane Kurisu here and wanted to get your thoughts about just what's happening here through the Hawaii Executive Collaborative and Rediscovering Hawaii. So if you can just introduce to us how you were brought into this conversation and what you've learned and gained through this process thus far.
So I think that what there was a small sort of group of initial conspirers in this, and they went out and reached out to different people. I was approached by Kamana Opono Crab about participating in this, and like many of the other Hawaiians, kupuna, kumuhula that came into this process in the summer of 2022, we didn't really know anything about the Hawaii Executive Collaborative. We didn't know they existed. We strongly suspected that they were some kind of corporate, arm of the state of Hawaii. But, we were willing to come in part because we knew each other, and I knew who was coming, and I trusted them. I'd never met Duane before, or indeed a number of those people who run businesses in banks and Matson and other, and because we don't really travel in the same circles unless we're opposing each other in testimony at the ledge. So we don't actually know each other. In fact, I think the thing that's probably the most true thing about this assemblage of people is that we had been in conflict before, and over time, over issues that are really, really important in Hawaii. So that's how we were brought in. And I didn't even stay the whole 4 days. We had another trip planned, my wife and I, and we went off on that. But I was there for the first 2 days of this conference, or this workshop, and very impressed relatively quickly with the process that was outlined by Reyes, and Adam Kahane, how it was supposed to work, what it was supposed to create. And it required a certain amount of trust in that process to participate really meaningfully, and to participate and give everything you had, to be direct, to be honest, to be willing to engage in not just conversation, but sometimes even bordering on confrontation. So that's what we did, and I felt over the course of those 2 days that pretty much everybody that was there was willing to do the same kind of thing, just willing to engage, willing to listen, and to realize that whatever it was we were creating, and what we were creating, as it turns out, were these scenarios. Whatever we were creating would be a joint communal effort, and I do believe it was.
And what has it been like to go from maybe only seeing each other once a year at the ledge and testifying on different issues on opposite sides to now collaborating with one another, working through these scenarios and taking on the topic, like we're going to talk about in a moment, about the kingdom lands? What has it been like to sort of see that shift? So,
I know that for Duane, the shift was pretty momentous, like psychologically, because I'm going to put this differently. It was huge for him to be able to listen and to set aside, and this is true for, I think, a number of the people who were in that room, to set aside the kinds of prejudices they had about Native Hawaiians as just people who oppose things, who are so, wrapped up in our cultural practices that we can't be practical. The kinds of issues we're dealing with: Mauna Kea, military, tourism, all of those kinds of things that we weigh in consistently. Hawaiians weigh in on those issues consistently. We take leadership really in generally in opposing the general direction that the state has taken on these things. It was a huge thing for them on that side, on the executive collaborative side, to sit down and listen and realize that we had the things that we were really vitally interested in were things that they should take seriously. It was also as large a shift for us not just to trust them and to listen to what their concerns were, but to be aware that we also answer to our own communities. You know, we've been involved in protests for so long that, and you use a word like collaborative. That's a difficult word in my political circles, because it means so many really negative things, you know, historically. You collaborate with the enemy. You collaborate with people for your own personal advancement. What we're looking at here is actually something so large and so important for our future, and that is the future of this place and the people who live here, not just Native Hawaiians, but all the people who live here. The people that will eventually, we're going to marry, we're going to have children with. The people who actually do become a part of our lahui. That's been the whole history of our encounter with every single ancestry that has come here. So that's the group we're talking about, and the issues are, what are we doing to this place that make it really, really, really difficult to see a positive future for Hawaii? And what can we do to change it?
You know, you mentioned some of those issues at the top of some of the things that have really caused division within the community, because there are just so many different stances and opinions on it. And one of the things that this movement has done is really put those issues to the table and get various opinions on, to try to find that commonality. We talked about military, education, and tourism. One of the areas that we know that you're specifically talking and working on, and we just spoke to Duane about, is this kingdom lands or ceded lands. And I think if we can begin this conversation on this issue, on just some of the terminology as it's evolved over time, because it has been such a very complex issue with a number of evolutions over the years. If you can take us through as quickly as we can, because we have too many time, and I know it's a very difficult thing to try to summarize, but maybe some of the differences and core things that you think are very important to address here with this initiative.
The most important thing for people to understand, and I don't think that the majority of people in Hawaii really, really know what this is. When we talk about ceded lands, we're actually talking about crown and government lands. These were the lands that were actually, they were property in the Kingdom of Hawaii. And Hawaii was ruled by law and by constitutions and by legislators and legislations from 1840 until 1893. So in this period of time, there were lands that belonged to the government of the kingdom. Those are government lands. There were lands that belonged originally to Kauikeauli, Kamehameha III, and then were moved down to each of his successors until they became the property of Liliuokalani. First Kalakaua, then Liliuokalani. The crown lands at that point were pretty close to 1 million acres. Government lands were slightly more than 1 million acres. And when the kingdom was, in fact, illegally overthrown in 1893 with the assistance of the United States, and a client government was basically set up, the Republic of Hawaii, in 1894, the Republic of Hawaii existed for one thing and one thing only, and it existed to seek annexation by the United States. When the United States took over Hawaii in 1898, the Republic ceded the crown and government lands that it controlled by force. After they removed the Queen, they took over those lands. They didn't get title to them. They didn't suddenly magically become the owners of all this land. They simply took it, and they simply gave it to the United States. The U.S. received those lands, but we would argue to the end of time that the United States never got title to those lands. The United States over the course of the first 4 decades of the 20th century, executive orders removed large amounts of lands to create military bases and national parks. So, Shafter, Schofield, these were sort of the initial takings. Later, Kaneohe, Bellows. Well, actually, Bellows is a different thing. But basically, they took what lands they needed for military bases. And then in 1959, when the United States basically made Hawaii a state, they transferred the balance of those lands, along with the Hawaiian homelands, over 200,000 acres, to the state of Hawaii and said, these are your lands now. And these lands have, these are lands to be used for Native Hawaiians and for the general public. They created in that transfer, they made the state of Hawaii the trustee for these public lands. And the state of Hawaii now has, under law, is responsible, is the trustee to protect the public interests and the Native Hawaiian interests in these lands.
And do you think that the state has been fulfilling that obligation?
No, I do not. And I think that increasingly the people who are engaging in this conversation are recognizing that it has not. And to give you a really good example is Pohakuloa. 2014, Ku Cheng and Max Kaho'olelo initiate a lawsuit over Pohakuloa. Goes up to the circuit court, and this lawsuit, all they're basically saying is that the state has never monitored, has only rarely monitored what was happening on Pohakuloa, the military gunnery range, the damage that was being done. Pohakuloa is leased from Hawaiian homelands for $1 for 64 years, 65 years. That lease expires in 2029. And right now, so 2014, they're suing, and the circuit court finds that in fact, the state has breached its responsibilities to act as a proper trustee. They didn't monitor, they never admonished the military to clean up after specific operations. They had no idea, really. After the lawsuit was initiated, the LNR actually did conduct a monitoring in December of 2014, and they said, yeah, there's been abuse here. They acknowledged that these things happen. That's just one example. But you could look more broadly at what the state faces in terms of what it's taken on as its responsibilities. Rising sea levels have created a real problem, for instance, on the North Shore, with houses literally falling right onto the beaches. And a real question about, what the state is obligated to do for those private property owners who are losing their properties further inland. The state assumes a responsibility for all of that, for everything up to the high water mark, right? So what is it going to do in the future as the high water mark moves further and further inland? We have other examples of where the state has exchanged large acreages of forest land for, tiny little parcels of industrial lands, basically without really too much scrutiny. And so our issue at this particular point is we don't really think that centralized control of these kingdom lands, which amount to about 1.8 million acres altogether, we don't think it's working. And we really believe that what we could do much more profitably, and I mean that in the larger sense, not just in terms of money, is to push down control, management, governance of those lands down to communities that could actually use them, with benefit to their communities. This is what Duane is talking about, returning to an ahupua kind of system. Kingdom lands are everywhere in the state of Hawaii. They're everywhere. And it would be very difficult to find an existing community that didn't have kingdom lands in sort of close contiguity to it. These lands are all different. Some of them are in forested areas. Some of them are close to streams and water sources. Some of them are kahakai, close to the ocean. What we are arguing for is locally based management that takes into account the actual value of that land, what it can actually produce, and allowing those communities to enrich themselves, to grow themselves by the ability to use those lands.
And through this process of working with, Duane, as well as the entire HEC and this initiative of Rediscovering Hawaii. So what are some of the conversations like that are happening right now as you talk about this issue, particularly with other business leaders, with maybe politicians? Do you feel like they are understanding some of the arguments that you have been trying to make for maybe, and Native Hawaiians have been trying to make for generations now?
I have to be really honest with you. I think, first of all, that this effort is just beginning. So the conversation we've had on Kingdom lands it's just like a month ago. And we sat around the table, and basically people said, we had folks like Kamana Opono talking about opuali'i, the old way of ruling in which really you knew that leadership was good and right by the productivity of the land and the hardworking people and the fact that the land and the people were being nourished. We've talked about the konohiki system in which there were experts on virtually every speck of land in Hawaii. Every place had a name. Every place was known by someone in the community, usually someone of rank, who could understand what that land could produce under certain weather conditions, what you would do when the weather changed, what you could and what you couldn't do with those lands. And we don't have that kind of knowledge at the state level. DLNR doesn't collect that kind of knowledge. In fact, and this is really important, there has not been an actual inventory of the kingdom lands. We don't actually know, the state doesn't actually know exactly where the lands are and what they produce. And that's the first thing that needs to happen. And I want to just finish this thought. The state of Hawaii has to conduct an inventory of all the lands under its authority. And the federal government has to give us an accounting of the lands that are being used by the military and by its parks. Every place where the military has taken those lands, those, we would argue, are also a part of the public trust, in part because they are government lands, and the government lands existed for the people of Hawaii in the kingdom. It was there. We built our schools on them. We generated revenues for different communities on those government lands. When Maka'ainana were found not to really have much property, the government auctioned off 167,000 acres in a period of time to Maka'ainana, to Native Hawaiians.
So this inventory that you're talking about, is that something that you would do with the collaborative? Is that something that the working group is working on to try to at least know what we're talking about?
I think that's step one. And we need this inventory to be done seriously. It should probably be done by an independent firm or organization, I think. And I think it needs to be an inventory like you may have never seen before. Not just the boundaries or the polena of those lands, but also what they contain. Where are the water sources? Do they sit over an artesian well, over an aquifer? What are what kinds of fish normally habituate that place, and when do they come? The kind of knowledge, right, that would be necessary for community-based management. I mean, I think that's where we really want to see this effort go. The inventory is not just done so that the state can figure out, which lands they can They can build houses on and apartments on. But really, what is the first step you would need to take in order to assure that a community living close to to those lands would be able to develop them along the lines of what nature intended them to do?
I do want to ask you, unfortunately, we are almost out of time here, but when we look at some of the things that this Hawaii, Rediscovering Hawaii Soul initiative is trying to do, there will be a lot of skepticism out there. People saying, we've tried this before. It didn't work. Where we try to get people together to talk about things, and there continues to be so much division. How do you feel like this is different? Does it feel different? How is the conversations maybe different from what you've seen over your years of being this strong Native Hawaiian voice in this community?
It's still very small, but I compare this, to the way in which the Democratic Party and the labor unions in the 1950s were able to take control, basically, of government from the Republicans and bring about, a very long-standing kind of democratic regime in Hawaii. They did that through organization, but it was also because there was a fairly common understanding of what needed to happen in Hawaii, so that the old plantation mentality and economy would be set aside for good and for ill. For us now, I think there's a growing common belief that climate change, that government inaction and really lack of imagination and lack of will, that specific environmental damage being done by the military, for instance, or even by the creation of new subdivisions. Why are we having to have brownwater alerts, right, fairly constantly on this island and other islands as well? So environmental damage, and just a sense that you can't. We call, more and more people are calling for capping tourism, So, and we see nothing on the horizon there. The future of the military in Hawaii is really, really important because they control so much of our land, and we absolutely believe that there's not anywhere nearly enough monitoring of what takes place on those lands. I do think that this is a conversation that's going to continue to take place and build outside of government and force government's hand. I've not seen anything like this. And one last thing, it can't just be done by our people. It can't just be done by Native Hawaiians. And we have led these things, these issues, for such a long time, more than 40 years. We've been talking about these things. We need to bring the non-Hawaiians in, because we may legally own these lands, but people who live on them have a kuleana to them. And I think that's what Duane was trying to express earlier too when he said ko Hawaii. People who live on these lands have a responsibility to them and to each other.
Hey, Dr. John Osorio, thank you so much for being here today. We're going to check in with you again in a couple of months. Stay with us. Spotlight Hawaii. We'll be right back.
Spotlight now with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalei-Suji. Connecting you with newsmakers from throughout our islands. Going in depth with Hawaii's leaders and taking your questions live. Spotlight now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, very engaging conversation today, really talking about rediscovering Hawaii Soul, this entire movement that's happening, and really you get a sense of just the passion that both of our guests have about this issue.
Yeah, and it is so interesting to see leaders from Bishop Street and from the Native Hawaiian community and other leaders coming together in the political arena, all engaging on these very important issues, having some difficult conversations, not necessarily always in agreement, but really trying to push Hawaii in the best direction and move forward. Someone else who is leading Hawaii is our guest next week.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to be catching up with our monthly chat with Governor Josh Green. Of course, a lot happening at the ledge with a number of the governor's proposals that are still in front of lawmakers as they kind of figure out what to do about Lahaina, as well as the rebuilding efforts, but also some of the general initiatives that the governor has really been trying to advocate for.
And if you want to learn more about Rediscovering Hawaii Soul, we want to mention that website again, hawaiisoul.org. You can also learn about the scenarios by checking out Honolulu Magazine's January issue. They devoted the whole issue to this to this topic. So we want to acknowledge that as well. You can learn more there. We hope you join us next week with the governor. Until then, enjoy this shot of beautiful overcast Hilo.